Alleged Chinese government election interference is rattling Canadian politics. A string of media reports based on leaked intelligence reveals both the 2019 and 2021 elections were targeted. Senior government officials are adamant the integrity of those elections were not compromised. The allegations, though, are alarming, and my next guest says they're just the tip of the iceberg. Cheuk Kwan is co-chair of the Toronto Association for Democracy in China. He joins us now from Toronto. Mr. Kwan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So for many Canadians, these reports of foreign interference may come as a surprise, but I know they're not surprising to you. What can you tell us about how Beijing runs foreign interference operations in Canada?
Well, it all started about 34 years ago after Tiananmen Square massacre, when Beijing was eager to burnish its image internationally, and they have started setting up what I would call proxy organizations with the help of the Chinese consulate and many other individuals sympathetic to the regime. And they became kind of entrenched in our community, not only as a sort of a mouthpiece for the regime, but also to provide actually, social services. And through these organizations and through their proxies, Beijing has been able to exert very soft influence in many ways, in many levels of our government, in academics, in the business, of course, and of course in the Chinese diaspora itself, the Chinese Canadian community, if you will.
Is that the primary focus, or do these operations primarily target Chinese Canadians?
No, they are targeted at Canadian society at large, but the Chinese Canadian community is, of course, a nice byproduct, because there's always been this desire for Beijing to control everything, and they would like to control the overseas Chinese who have moved away, perhaps even for generations, from China.
Right, so you say this all started 30, 40 years ago, sort of in the wake of Tiananmen Square, to sort of rebuild image. I mean, if it's been going on that long, and I know organizations like yours have been warning about this for years, if not decades, how concerned are you about how the government hasn't done enough? Or do you believe the government hasn't done enough on dealing with this?
Well, I think people like CSIS has been quite active, especially in the last 10 years or so. I know that they've been keeping an eye on and actually monitoring a few politicians that they suspect have been influenced by China. And I know for a fact that some of these people they're watching are people that we watch as well. Our organization almost functions as a watchdog as well, because we speak the language, we read the posts, we can follow social media, and we can go from website and see who's who and who's meeting whom and who's dining and wining and dining whom. So we get that, and that includes a lot of Canadian politicians and government officials being wined and dined by people like the organizations I spoke about.
So help me understand this, because the allegation right now, the headline story right now, certainly in the Globe and Mail, was that China wanted to help elect liberals to get a liberal minority government, and they wanted to defeat conservatives who they believed had policies that were unfavorable to China. In your experience on monitoring this, is it that starkly partisan? Is China, in your view, interested in electing liberals at the expense of conservatives? Or, because we've had allegations of a progressive conservative member of the Ontario legislature being targeted, is it just anybody who might help advance China's interests, and it's not a partisan effort?
Basically, it comes down to anybody who can help. However, they understand the federal situation. They understand that perhaps from the Harper days, the conservatives are a little bit tougher on them than the liberals would. And that's why in the last 10, 12 years, they have been pretty much putting the money on the liberals. And, I mean, it's no fault of the liberals, obviously, but certainly they are the beneficiary of these Chinese operations. And as you mentioned, there have been a few progressive conservative candidates or MPPs from Ontario that also benefited from these Chinese initiatives.
Right, or at least that's the allegation. That's the reporting, certainly by Global, completely unverified by us. But you know, I know you've been calling for a foreign agent registry as one of the measures to deal with this, and the government has started consultations on this. Is that good enough for you? Are you satisfied? It seems a lot of people are criticizing how slow the federal government's gone on this. Are you satisfied with the steps that they've taken over the past week or so?
Well, just to understand the background, you know, MP Kenny Cheuk, the Conservative MP, was calling for it for a year or two now, and maybe that's perhaps contributed to his recent defeat. And then, of course, I know the senator has been calling for it as well. There were private members' bill being proposed, but I think it has been stalled by the government. And obviously, we want to see this implemented as quickly as possible. So to my dismay, you know, the first time I read about that the Liberal government might be doing something, somebody would say, well, we need a study on this. You know, that's another kind of perhaps stalling tactic. And we urge the government to be quicker. I know there are a lot of circumstances that might want them to be more careful about installing these kind of registries. However, you know, Australia has done it for 5 years now. They have been very successful. In 2018, Australia passed the Foreign Intelligence Act, basically cleaning house, because they were looking at a lot of politicians, a lot of officials that have very cozy relationship with the Chinese consulate and the Chinese associations and affiliates, and they were alarmed. And hence they have done a good, what I consider a very good job of making sure that the integrity of the election, as well as the society, has been, you know, preserved.
Right, it's bigger than just the interference in the election period, as you've outlined. It's a whole of society, or attempt to influence the thought process of the whole of society. But
that's right.
You know, on the slow pace of the foreign agent registry, and even on the consultations, and on questions around a public inquiry, the government has pivoted back to concerns about anti-Asian racism. You know, that there would be backlash against Chinese Canadians. Do you share those concerns of the government on those fronts?
No, I would categorically say, you know, the Chinese Canadian community welcomes such a registry. I mean, shining a light on a few bad apples is not enough to overturn your apple cart. So I think it's all good. Our worry is that the people in charge are perhaps hiding behind this racism shield in terms of deflecting the issue, and at worst, I think exacerbated the kind of anti-Asian racism that we might have seen during the pandemic. So I think, you know, for one, we need to be obviously very careful in the language that we use. I would advocate, you know, saying separating the China, the country, from the people of China or Chinese people. So in that sense, I think our government has to be very careful in doing that.
I just have one last question for you. I know you're part of a group that's called for a public inquiry into foreign interference in Canada. A report that was released in March of 2020, which is very unfortunate timing for your organization, considering that's when COVID sort of took over absolutely everything. I mean, do you think it's inevitable right now with the appointment of the special rapporteur that Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, will have to call a public inquiry into this issue? Do you think it's avoidable at this point?
I don't think the special rapporteur goes far enough. I would advocate for a very open public inquiry. Only by doing that, certainly a lot of information can be redacted, but there are information that are not confidential, and that should be shared with the public. I think it will give assurance to the Chinese Canadian community that after so many months and years of asking for protection of, you know, their community from harassment and intimidation by the Chinese Communist Party, they would welcome such a public, very open, very public inquiry.
Okay. Cheuk Kwan, thank you for being so open with us. We appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.